Hello dear friends, and welcome back to Pillow Pasta. You know, a lot of people think cartoon characters have it easy in the world, but they have just as many problems as the rest of us. And this particular story is about one of those cartoon characters. The story when everyone's favourite grumpy man cephalopod finally had enough. This is Squidward's suicide.
I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer by the end of this, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one.
It's not every day the first line uttered in a story is the writer apologising for said story.
I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year back in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy for it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it. Without giving too many unnecessary details, we had very recently made the Spongebob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer than usual to start up the new season. But the delay lasted longer for more unsettling reasons. There was a problem with the Season 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months.
Yeah, apparently rewriting Mr. Krabs as a chain-smoking Nazi sympathizer didn't sit too well in testing.
Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up mock title cards, sort of an inside joke for us with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Bivalve, when Spongebob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yells at him to keep it down, as he has a concert that night, and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that was common in the show, but you could very clearly hear the malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes down to the crowd with SpongeBob in the center frame, and he too was booing. Very much unlike him. This isn't the oddest thing though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes.
Oh Christ, not this again!
Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out his porthole window is of the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part of this comes at the point where there is no sound. Like, literally no sound, not even feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, although the status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds, and then he started to sob softly. He put his tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute, all the while a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face, By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you have a shot 10 seconds apart, side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second and then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slightly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere.
Oh no, it's okay. It's just the finale of At World's End happening outside.
The eerie part is this sound, and Squidward's sobbing sounding real. As if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but if the speakers were holes and the sound was coming through from the other side.
So, like speakers?
As good as sound as the studios like to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangling over his upturned face popped. His stomach crudely cut open and his entrails lying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road.
Ah yes, the sign where your story is going nowhere, so you just go, oh, what can I do? What's memorable? Oh, dead babies!
The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime scene tape or evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but we pressed on, hoping it was just a sick joke.
Oh, those animators and their dead baby jokes? Seriously?
The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it was a gale blowing through a forest. There was even snapping sounds of branches. And the laughing. A deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were. But he knew he had to. This time the photo was what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out, and her entrails were piled on top of her. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out, and the show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism like the others were at the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all, sobbing was mixed with the sounds of screams.
Sir, seriously, can we stop watching this now? Oh, come on, it's clearly just those animators joking on us. Don't be such a pinhead.
Who you calling pinhead?
Tears and blood were dripping from his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted a good 5 frames.
I'll spare us a third entry of child torture, because I just find it a cheap and unimaginative scare tactic.
The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was being called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer. Full frame of his face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out. That deep voice said, "Do it!" We see in Squidward's hand a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters on the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it, and then the episode ends.
Well, with the episode over, let's see what the man himself thought of it.
Well, you did it. You took my one chance at happiness and crushed it.
Oh, that's a bit harsh.
Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it into my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone from the chain of the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis showed the file was indeed edited over by the new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we started viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have been glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came out of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have seen something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things.
So we're ending with a paranormal angle, which leads me to believe that the one responsible for the episode was the Frying Dutchman! Ow! Well, that was Squidward's suicide. And it's a pretty cliche entry into the cliche haunted episode genre. But saying that, it's pretty well written. It's pretty eerie and it doesn't dawdle unnecessarily. But I gotta say, I'm not too fond of the child murder angle that these pastors keep throwing in there because they can't come up with anything better. And it kind of ends a bit ambiguously, like, what was the point? I mean, what was the payoff? Well, thank you for joining me on this episode of Pillow Pasta, and until next time, sweet dreams.